illegal, where you could go to jail for bribing an official in another country to get business. That law emerged out of another era, with revelations of political corruption in the Watergate scandal.
I made my mistakes. Well, I'm not a crook.
During the Watergate hearings, it was revealed that major corporations made payments in cash to President Nixon's re-election campaign.
When we looked into these funds, we found out they were not only being used domestically in the United States for illegal campaign contributions, but we found that the same monies were being used to bribe officials overseas in connection with the company's business.
Sporkin's investigation found that 500 American companies had spent hundreds of millions of dollars bribing everyone from prime ministers to police overseas, which it turned out was not illegal.
Bribery was something you deducted from your tax returns.
Right. Companies deducted those payments just like any other regular expense. Bribing a foreign government official wasn't prohibited. It was something that people could do, and they got away with, and they got business as a result, and so they carried on.
We came up with a voluntary disclosure program, and some 500 or more companies eventually came in and made disclosures.
Hundreds of companies came in and confessed?
Yes.
I found out when I got in office that the Securities and Exchange Commission had gotten testimony from more than 100 corporate executives that they were involved in what I consider to be criminal activity, that is bribery. So I was very eager to see this practice stopped and ran into a hornet's nest because a lot of corporations claimed that they couldn't sell in competition with the French and British and others overseas if they didn't bribe officials who were in charge of making the purchase.
Other U.S. companies continued to bribe.
The culture had not changed. There was undoubtedly a tendency of companies that had been engaged in bribery prior to the FCPA to continue to pay bribes, but to become more careful in how it was done.
You were a briber. I've bribed all sorts of people. That's what I got paid to do. That's what I got trained to do. 21 years in the CIA, I spent millions of dollars in cash, bribing government officials, bribing golf princes, buying hookers for golf princes.
Were you ever competing with a multinational corporation?
That's who we competed with because they could pay real money. I mean, let's face it, the CIA were pikers when it came to this. It was the big corporations who could outbuy us any day of the year.
And the big corporations were also complaining to Congress. Because of the law against bribery, they said they were at a competitive disadvantage doing business abroad. So the U.S. government took the case against bribery to Paris, to the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Swiss prosecutor Marc Piet was an early ally.
I've been giving talks to heads of corporations in France, and they were asking, what do you think you're doing? Imagine a breakfast room with the CEOs of the top listed French companies sitting there in a hotel, looking at me. I didn't eat breakfast, they had breakfast, and they're saying, you must be a madman, and you are messing up the way we do business. You have to know, and you're basically the slave of the Americans.
Slave?
The slave of the Americans.
You, as Swiss prosecutor?
In the beginning of the 90s, we started really fighting against corruption, also by the legal means.
Eva Joly, then a French magistrate who was leading the largest corruption investigation in the history of France, was also arguing for an international treaty.
This was quite a revolution, because people in power do not like the investigation to come too close to them.
It took nearly 10 years of lobbying before the OECD members finally agreed to a treaty known as the Anti-Bribery Convention.
What changed their minds?
I think it's hard to defend corrupt business practices. I think that those countries who ultimately joined the convention realized that this was the only path forward. I think it was untenable for some of these countries to say, no thank you, we'd rather permit our companies to bribe.
It's hard to be publicly in favor of bribery.
Indeed.
Mark Piet was appointed to lead the group. He knew that even though they had now criminalized international bribery, the practice was not going away.
Companies found themselves in a very awkward situation. Suddenly, the element of risk rose. And there's a double risk. On the one hand, you might be caught. On the other hand, you might lose out because your competitors are not playing game.
Your competitors are continuing to bribe.
Right.
That's what this man told us he kept doing for one of Germany's largest companies, the Siemens Corporation, after the anti-bribery treaty was signed.